Maseches Chagiga Daf Tes Zayin contains one Mishnah. From the beginning of the Daf until the Mishnah, the Gemara wraps up its Agadat discussion about Brias Olam. It'll talk about the Shadim, how they are like people, how they are like Malachim, and a number of other statements. We'll be analyzing the last few lines of our last Mishnah, things that it said we are not supposed to learn because they will be Kfira, and things which we are not supposed to look at, and things which we are better off not being created if we violate them. Then we'll get to the Mishnah, which will discuss the halacha of smicha, leaning on a carbon, and whether that should be done on Yom Tov or not. That is the first machlokas in concise. The Gemara will discuss the 5 pairs of Talmid and Chamim who argued about it. The Gemara will discuss which member of each pair was the Nasi, and which member was the Av Vezin, and the Gemara will go on to show the seriousness of leaning on an animal for a carbon and as to how we do it properly. Okay, so let's begin. So the Gemara starts with the Brisa. We're a few lines into the daf. The Brisa says that there are 6 ways in which a shade, that is a force of, it's a spiritual force from the side of evil. There's 6 ways in which it's like a malach, and 6 ways and there are 6 factors that are said about it. 3 ways in which it is like a malach, and 3 ways in which it is like a person. The 3 ways in which it's like a malach is that it has wings like a malach, flies like a malach from one end of the world to the other, and understands the future like a malach. Mar says it doesn't know the future of its own, but it hears from behind the curtain, as it were, from a Kadosh Baruch Hu. And those 3 ways are like malach yesharis. The 3 ways in which are like people, and that is that they eat and drink like people, they reproduce like people, and they die like people do. Now the Brisa continues that there are 6 things that it says about people, 3 in which they are like Malachi Asharis, and 3 which they are like animals. The 3 ways in which people are like Malachi Asharis is that they have understanding, they have knowledge, like Malachim. They walk with an upright stature, an upright vertical posture like Malachim, and they speak in Lashon HaKodesh like Malachim. 3 ways in which are like animals is that they eat and drink, they reproduce, and they excrete waste material just like animals do. Right now the Gemara refers back to Mishnah where we had seen that somebody who looks at 4 things is better that he had not been created. The 4 things are if he thinks about what's above, what's below, what's before, and what's after. The Gemara has already discussed this, but the Gemara brings it here. The Gemara says, I understand what's wrong with discussing what's above and what's below. You're trying to understand a Kadosh Baruch Hu who's a part of the universe, which you cannot possibly get correct. Understand that you shouldn't discuss what's in the future, because that's also HaKadosh Baruch Hu's realm. But what's wrong with discussing what's before? And what was in the past? Before the world was created, what's wrong with that? It already happened. What's the issue? So the Gemara says, Rav Yochanan and Rav Elazar both said that it's a mashal to a king who told his servants to build a palace for him on a garbage heap. To transform the garbage heap, the nice landscaping, and build a palace there. So he does not want people to refer to the place as the trash heap, even though it's not like that anymore. If people refer to it as it once was, that would be insulting, as it were, to the king. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu similarly does not want to refer to the universe in its previous improper state. Okay, next line in the Mishnah was, anyone who does not care for the honor of his creator is better having not been created. Where says, what's that referring to? Where says that's referring to somebody who stares at a rainbow. That's Rav Abba's explanation. Rav Yosef says that's somebody who violates in Avera. He does a sin in secret, and it's as if he doesn't care about HaKadosh Baruch Hu being there, because he's not afraid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu seeing him. He's only afraid of people seeing him, and therefore he's okay doing it in secret. So Gemara says, what's the source that there's a problem to stare at a rainbow? So the Gemara quotes a pasuk in Yechezkel describing Ma'aseh Merkava, and it says, Kamar Keshes Asher Yeh Ba'anan B'yom HaGeshem Kein Mar Hanoga Saviv Humar Demos Kvod Hashem, that it looks like the look of a rainbow that is on a cloudy day. That is the look of the sparks that's around him, and is the image of the honor of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, as it were. Of course, is not meant to be understood in the literal sense. So the Gemara says, therefore, someone who stares at a rainbow is not showing proper respect to what looks like a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Now, Rav Yosef said that it's somebody who violates an Avera in secret. So the Gemara says like Rav Yitzchak, because Rav Yitzchak says anybody who violates an Avera in secret is if he's pushing away the feet of the Shekhinah, because this world is like the feet of the Shekhinah, like it says Hashem says the heavens are my throne and the earth is my footstool. So you're pushing Hashem's presence away. You're saying as if Hashem has no presence in this world, because this person says that he doesn't care to be seen by Kadosh Baruch Hu. So he's pushing his presence out of the world, so he's pushing his feet. So Gemara asks, but Rav Elazar, the elder, Rav Elazar Zaken, said if somebody sees that his Yetzer Hara is overpowering him, he should go to a place where nobody knows him. He should put on black clothing, wrap himself in black, and he can do what his heart desires, but he should not make a Chilul Hashem in public. So you see, it's better to do an Aveira in secret. Why are we saying that it's worse? And Gemara says, no, it's two different situations. Where you should go there is if somebody sees that he cannot possibly control his Yetzer Hara, he's overpowered, he has no control. He doesn't want to do the Aveira, but what can he do? He's not in control. He should at least avoid making Chilul Hashem and go to a place where he is not going to be known. Now, the Rishonim here explain it does not mean that it's permitted for him to do this. He should not give into it. He should fight with everything he has. But possibly by going somewhere he's not known, he will not feel such a balgaiva. He will feel more vulnerable, and then it'll stop him from being over these Averas. Now, the situation in which we said that one is as if he's pushing away the Shechina if he violates an Aveira in secret, that's where he could control it, but instead he just says, listen, why should I bother controlling it? I'd rather do what I want as long as no one sees. There he's clearly showing that he is not afraid and he doesn't care or doesn't believe, doesn't accept the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the world. Now, the Gemara says a drasha that was said by Rav Yehuda ben Rabbi Nachmani, who was the Turgamane, he was the translator and the announcer for Rish Lakish. He said over Rish Lakish's shir out loud to the public. So he said on his own, anybody who looks at three things will have his eyes grow dim. That is somebody who stares at a rainbow, somebody who looks at a nasi, and somebody who looks at the Kohanim. So the Gemara explains each of them. The Gemara says at a rainbow because it says Kamari Kasha Sarshiyah Ba'anan B'Yom HaGeshem Hu Mari Demus Kavod Hashem, and therefore it says if he's looking at Kadosh Baruch Hu. Somebody looks at a nasi, that's because it says V'Nasatem Hoydcha Olav, Hashem puts from His glory on the nasi, and therefore again it's as if he's staring at a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Somebody looks at Kohanim, that's when the Beis HaMikdash stood, and the Kohanim stood on the Duchan, on the platform, and they gave a bracha to Klal Yisrael using the Shem HaMefarish, the explicit name, so the Shechina came down and rested on their fingers, and one could not stare at that. Elimar says another drasha of Rav Yehuda by Rabbi Nachmani, who was the translator of Rish Lakish. So he said, what is meant by Al Taminu Bara, Al Tiftachu Ba'aluf? Don't believe evil, and don't trust the Aluf, the leader, the teacher. So he explained this means as follows. Al Ta'aminu Bara, don't trust the evil. That means don't trust the Yetzer Hara tells you to do an Aveira, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu will just forgive you. Not a problem. Don't trust that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will forgive you, because He may not necessarily forgive you. So don't listen to the Yetzer Hara, because it says, Ki Yetzer Leiv Ha'adam Ra, that the Yetzer, the drive of a person is evil. And Aluf refers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like it says, Aluf Nu'urai Ata, you are the general of my youth. Now, Gemara continues and says, maybe you'll say, who's going to testify against me? Nobody sees. I'm here in secret. So the Gemara says, well, besides HaKadosh Baruch Hu seeing you, there are things that will testify against you. The stones of the wall of your house, the stones of your house, the walls of your house, they will testify against you. Like it says, Ki Evan Mikir Tizak, a stone from the wall will scream. And a piece of wood from the tree will speak against one when he does these Averos. The Chachamim say one's own soul will testify against him, like it says, that which lies in your lap was watching the ways in which your mouth opens. So what lies in your lap, that refers to a person's own neshama. Zvika says there are two Malachei Yesharis that accompany a person everywhere he goes. They will testify against him, like it says, he commands his angels to watch you in all your ways. And then one other approach here, possibly from the Chachamim, depending on the Girsa, is that a person's own limbs will testify against him, like it says, "Atem Edayin Om Hashem v'Ani you are my witnesses." So we ourselves will testify against our own self. Okay, now we get to the next Mishnah. The next Mishnah discusses Machokas, whether one should do Smicha on a carbon Chagiga on Yom Tov or not. So we know we brought a carbon Chagiga on Yom Tov. It's a carbon Shlamim. Carbon Shlamim usually requires one to lean on it. That's he puts his full weight on it. However, there's an Issur D'Rabbanan to lean on an animal on Shabbos, or on Yom Tov for that matter, because one is using the animal, and therefore one, various different reasons for it, may come to ride on it. It's compared to riding. He may break a branch in order to help steer the animal. So there's an Issur D'Rabbanan to lean on an animal, but it's part of the carbon. So should a person do smicha? Should he lean on the animal on Yom Tov or not? So this was the first Machokas in Klal Yisrael, and 5 pairs of Talmidei Chachamim, generation after generation, disputed it. The pairs were the Nasi, the leader of the generation, and the Av Beis Din, the leader of the court. So the pairs were as follows. Yossi ben Yezer and Yossi ben Yochanan were the first pair. Yossi ben Yoezer said one should not do smicha. Yossi ben Yochanan said they should. Next pair was Yeshua ben Prachke, who said they should not do smicha, and Nitei Ha'arbeli, who said they should do smicha. Next pair was Yehuda ben Tavai, who said they should not do smicha, and Shimon ben Shatach, who said they should do smicha. Up till now, the first Talmud Chacham in each pair said no, and the second one said yes. Now, from here on, there are two more pairs, and they're switched. Shemaiah said that they should do smicha, and Avtayin said they should not do smicha. And then it says that you had Hillel, and the Talmud Chacham who was paired with him was at first Menachem. So with Hillel and Menachem both said he should do smicha, but then Menachem went out. The Gemara will explain where he went. And Shammai came in instead, and he said not to do smicha. So now you had a machlokas Hillel and Shammai. Hillel saying to do smicha, and Shammai saying not to do smicha. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, in each of these pairs, the first Talmud Chacham listed is the Nasi, and the second one is the Av Bezdin. The Gemara quotes a brisa that says that's not so simple. There's a machlokas about that. And it points out that in the first three sets, the first three pairs, the first opinion says not to do smicha, and the second Talmud Chacham says yes to do smicha. Then for the last two, it switches. First Talmud Chacham says yes to do smicha, and the last Talmud Chacham says not to do smicha. Now, according to Rabbi Meir, the Gemara says the first in each of the sets is the Nasi, and the latter one is the Av Bezdin, like we had in our Mishnah, where it says that the Chachamim disagree, and they say that Yehuda ben Tabai was not the Nasi, he was the Av Bezdin, and Shimon ben Shatach, who was his pair, he was the Nasi, disagreeing with Rabbi Meir. So Gemara quotes a brisa discussing a conversation or an incident between Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shatach. And the Gemara wants to know, who does it fit with? So what's the story here? Where it says Rabbi Yehuda ben Tabai says, I killed an Eid Zaymim in order to show that the Tzedukim were wrong. What's the issue? So the question is, an Eid Zaymim is a person who testifies against someone else falsely, trying to get him to suffer the punishment based on something which he did not do. And this Eid Zaymim is then found to be a liar because other pairs of Eidim came and said, you could not have been there and seen what you claim you saw because you were with us somewhere else. That's the only situation, and one is an Eid Zaymim. The Torah prescribes that if a case like this, once the Eid Zaymim is found to have been someplace else, we trust the second set of Eidim, not the first set of Eidim, and we say once the first Eid or Eidim has been found to be somewhere else, then we have to give him the punishment that he meant to give to the original victim. Now, the Tzedukim held that's only if you actually killed the original victim. You carried the punishment out against him. Then the witnesses become Zomim. Then you would then kill the witness. Now the Chavim held no. If you actually carried out the punishment, there is no halacha of Zomim. The person's a murderer perhaps, but Zomim he's not, and therefore he does not get that punishment. The reason is because the Torah describes it by saying Kasher Zomam. You'll do to this aid as he planned to do to the other one, not as he actually did. Once he actually did it, there's no halacha of Zomim anymore. So what does it mean when we link Nefesh b'Nefesh, as the Psukim do? What does it mean to tell you that you have to have Gemar Din? You have to have that the halacha was completed, the Beis Din Paskin that the original victim was testified against is guilty. Then, before he was killed, you found that the first set of Eidim was Zomim. Now, that's how the Chachamim learn it. Tzedukim, as we said it's only if he was actually killed. So, says the Gemara, Yehuda ben Tabai actually killed an Eid Zomim because he had been in that situation. He had testified Zomim against someone. There was a Gemara Din, the Sanhedrin Paskin, that he's Chayav Misa. He was not actually killed. Then somebody came and made this Eid Zomim, and therefore it was a situation where Shacham say he was Chayav Misa, and the Tzedukim would say he's not. In order to specifically show that they're wrong, he went ahead and he carried out the punishment, and he killed that Eid Zomim. So Gemara says that Shimon ben Shetach said, you're a murderer. Why so? You're absolutely right about the halacha that you're supposed to kill an Eid Zomim even if his plan, and only if his plan wasn't carried out, but it was after the Gzar Din, the Gemar Din. However, there's a different halacha that makes you a murderer, and that is you cannot have one member of a pair of Eidim be Zomim if the other one is not. And you said you only killed one Eid of an Eid Zomim pair. That's wrong. You got to be both. Whatever you're going to do, you have to do to both, and you have to find that both are Zomim. In your case, it was only one, and therefore you should not have killed him, and you murdered him. So the Gemara says that Yehuda ben Tabai accepted from him. He took that to heart, and he made a rule for himself afterwards, he would never paskin halacha unless Shimon ben Shetach was there who could correct him. But on his own, he would never paskin a halacha up till that point. From that point on, he would never paskin any halacha. Now, the Brisa continues, and it says that he was trying to do tshuva, and he was so upset at the fact that he had murdered someone by giving a wrong psak, that he went every day to prostrate himself on the grave of that witness that he had put to death, and he was crying and wailing to such an extent that people thought that it was the voice of the nifter, it was the spirit of the one who was killed who was crying. The Gemara says that that is Yehuda ben Tabai, said it's not the spirit you're hearing, it's me crying, and the proof is that after I die, you're not going to hear the sounds anymore. So Gemara says that it doesn't prove anything necessarily. Racha, son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, it could be that maybe once he died, the voice, which had actually been that of the spirit of the one who was killed, he was no longer upset because he had got his revenge, and therefore he didn't wail anymore. Or it could be that he called him to a din Torah and Shemayim, therefore he wasn't wailing anymore. So it doesn't necessarily prove that it was him who had been doing the wailing all along. Anyway, the Gemara here wants to bring a proof as to who was the Nasi and who was the Av Beis Din. So we know the Nasi is the leader, and the Nasi is allowed to paskin a halacha without asking the Av Beis Din. However, the Av Beis Din is never allowed to paskin a halacha without asking the Nasi. Now, the Gemara over here clearly says that after he had been shown by Shimon ben Shetach that he was wrong, he said, I'm no longer going to paskin any halachas on my own without consulting Shimon ben Shetach. That would clearly imply that before that, if not for this incident, he would have, and he did, paskin halachas on his own. He must therefore be the Nasi, and not Shimon ben Shetach. Gemara says that fits with Rabbi Meir. He's the one who said that was the way it was arranged, and not the other way around. Gemara says this is not necessarily a proof. It could be that it was really the Chachamim, and Yehuda ben Tabai was the Av Beis Din, Shimon ben Shetach was the Nasi. But the reason why he was able to paskin halachas on his own, and what he accepted not to do anymore, was to join a larger Beis Din in which he wasn't going to be saying halacha on his own. He would just be being part of the group and giving his opinion. That he accepted he's not going to do anymore until Shimon ben Shetach was there. Okay, the Gemara now refers back to the Mishnah where we had seen that Menachem went out. Menachem, who was the Zug opposed from Hillel, went out somewhere. Where did he go out to? Two versions. Rava said he went to serve the king, and Abai said he went to Tarbas Ra. He lost his way. So Gemara says that there's a brisa that says like Rava, that he went to serve the king. The brisa says Menachem went to serve the king, and he took with him 80 pairs of Talmidei Chachamim dressed in special royal clothing because they were going to work for the government. And the Gemara says Rav Shimon bar Abbas and Rav Yochanan, a person should always take a shvus, should take a halacha midrabanan, should take it seriously, because this halacha of leaning on the carbon smicha was only halacha derabanan. And you see that it was a machlokas that went generation after generation. People argued about it and took it very seriously. The Gemara says, of course you should take it seriously. Why shouldn't you take a shvus seriously? What kind of halacha is that? We have a brisa that says you should take every shvus very specifically, clearly, and seriously. So when it says no, we mean here a shvus that's going against the mitzvah. Here's an isur derabanan to lean on an animal, and that's going against a mitzvah of doing smicha and karbanos. We still take it very seriously. The Gemara says, well, that's not a chiddush either. We're discussing here this brisa where we're actually talking about a shvus that goes against a mitzvah. What's the chiddush there? So when it says no, what we want to do, what Rav Yochanan is trying to say is to explain what the issue here is. It was not about whether or not to do smicha, whether or not smicha is an appropriate thing to do. Because it's possible that this was not an issue about smicha on Yom Tov. It could be that the issue here was, do you really have to do smicha or not? Is smicha an important halacha? No, this is about smicha on Yom Tov against the shvus. That's what he's trying to say, that this was the issue that was being discussed over here, doing the mitzvah of smicha when it's going against the shvus. It wasn't a smicha issue, it was a smicha versus isur derabanan issue. Says the Gemara, you can see from here also that when we say that you have to do smicha on a carbon, it means you have to lean with all your strength on the carbon. That's the only way that there is any issue of doing it on Yom Tov. Because the only issue to lean on an animal on Yom Tov is leaning with all one's strength. If one would be able to fulfill the mitzvah of leaning on a carbon without leaning down on it strongly, then there wouldn't be an issue. You wouldn't be violating any halacha derabanan on Shabbos or Yom Tov. So the Gemara asks a question. as follows. We have a brisa that says, that it quotes the pasuk that says, Darbo b'nei Yisrael v'samach. It says that when the pasuk describes the mitzvah of smicha, it says, speak to b'nei Yisrael. So that teaches me that only b'nei Yisrael, only the males have to do smicha, women don't have to do smicha. Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shmuel say women are allowed to do smicha, but they're not obligated to do smicha. That means that the pasuk that says talk to Bnei Yisrael and say they have to do smicha, that's only for the men. Not that women don't do smicha, but they're not obligated to do smicha; they're allowed to do smicha. In that brisa there, Rabbi Yossi says, "My father Elazar." He says Abba Elazar. It's the man, the Tam Chacham's name. He said, well, once it happened that we had a calf, which was a carbon shlamim, we brought it to the women's courtyard, to the Ezras Nashim, and the women did smicha on it, not because there's a mitzvah of smicha for the women to do, but in order that they should have pleasure of being able to fulfill the mitzvah of smicha. So now the Gemara says, hold on a second. If you're telling me that smicha is not an obligation for the women, and you're telling me that smicha has to be, you have to lean with all your strength, so by the women leaning with all their strength on the smicha, on the animal, they are doing avoda, they are using an animal, they are using karbanos for their own purpose. To having the animal work for them is bearing their weight. You're not allowed to have an animal work for you. That's hektish, that's a carbon animal, that's forbidden. It's using hektish for your own things. Now, if it's a mitzvah smicha, not a problem, but if it's an optional smicha, so how would the women be allowed to do that? Obviously then they didn't lean with all their weight. So this is not a problem. It's not that that the mitzvah of smicha is not to lean with all their weight, but they told the women in this case, just put your hand lightly on the animal, do like a pretend smicha, do a sort of smicha, so that the women could enjoy the fact that they're doing the mitzvah, but not that it's a real smicha. So Gemara says, hold on a second. If they didn't do a real smicha, so then what? When we're saying over here that the mitzvah, there's not a real mitzvah of smicha for the women to do, so we should express that differently. We shouldn't say that the reason here that the women do smicha is not because there's a mitzvah. We should say that they didn't do a real smicha. We didn't let them do a real smicha. We only said put your hand on it lightly. That's what we should say. So Gemara says, yeah, both are true. It was not a real smicha, and there was no mitzvah of smicha. It was just an optional thing that they wanted to do. The Gemara now says there's another halacha we could learn out of the fact that there's a problem doing smicha on Yom Tov, and that is when the Chachamim made it aser to ride on an animal, and we include in that it's also to lean with full weight on the animal. That also includes the side of the animal, because if it was permitted to lean on the side of an animal, that's not called riding the animal. So then when you want to do smicha, you should be able to do smicha on the side of the animal. Now, even though you can't fulfill the mitzvah of smicha by leaning on the side of an animal, you could do the mitzvah of smicha by leaning on its head. So its head should be considered the same as the side. And if you're allowed to, there's no isser of working the animal by leaning on the side of the animal, there also should be no isser by leaning on the head of the animal, and that should fulfill the mitzvah of smicha. So Gemara says, therefore, obviously, leaning on the sides is also usher, even though it's not real riding. So Gemara says, no, it could possibly be not that way. It could just be that leaning on the animal's side, which is not smicha, you want to say they could lean on the animal's head, and that'll fulfill the mitzvah of smicha. It won't be considered any more than just leaning on its side. It's not correct. Leaning on the head is different than leaning on the side. And leaning on the head, it does count as leaning, and therefore it would be usher, even though leaning on the side would not. And the reason is because the head is the height of the back of the animal, and therefore that would be usher, even though leaning on the side is not.